Well, welcome back again this week to another analysis behind the news. Now, what I was afraid would happen is happening. You'll recall a couple of weeks ago that I said that I hope that our government isn't going to be arming the communist Kurds, and then that would come back and haunt us later in the future. Now, to add some perspective to this, we have to understand that the Kurdish Workers' Party is on the United States terrorist watch list, as is the Kurdish Democrat Party, both started by the Russians. Now, if you go to Wikipedia and look up Peshmerga and the Kurdish Workers' Party, that sort of thing, and scroll down to the bottom and see who is arming and has armed these people in the past, you'll see it's Russia, China, and the United States. We're talking about a pretty substantial rebel force, if you will. They have military armored vehicles, heavy weaponry, so on and so forth. So at any rate, what happened when I said that I speculated a couple of weeks ago that I thought this would happen was verified in this last Monday's Wall Street Journal. Actually, this is, let's see here. They've got everything on there but the front. Oh, here it is. August 18th. They verify it right on the front page. And they say, Kurds push to take key dam. And they did take it back. But now it's in the communist hands. And in fact, right under the caption on the front page, this is what it says. It says, Iraqi Kurdish Peshmerga fighters on Sunday head to the Mosul Dam, which they retook from the Islamic State militants. Kurds have gained ground in recent days with the help of U.S. airstrikes and guerrillas linked to the Kurdish Workers' Party, or PKK, a controversial ally. Well, I suppose it's controversial. They're on the terrorist watch list, and now we're helping them. So we've got two terrorists, right? We've got good terrorists and bad terrorists. And then they switch it and they become the bad terrorists and the good terrorists. And we keep helping these people. And we keep getting involved in stirring this stuff up. One of the things that's very disturbing about all of this is that we see the propaganda being put out about people being beheaded, that sort of thing, very grisly, people being shot. But, you know, you got to ask the question, why wasn't this individual beheaded when he was captured instead of being held for a while and then have it happen? I don't like to bring these things up. They're hard things to think about, particularly in the situation where the family is grieving and everything else. But you have to ask, what is special about this timing? We see individuals like former Vice President Cheney going around broadcasting and forecasting that we will probably have a major terrorist problem inside the United States. And then when it happens, he can come along and say, see, if you had listened to us neocons to begin with, this wouldn't have happened. If we'd had more controls, if we'd had more security, if we'd violated the Bill of Rights just a little bit more and gone and bombed some more people just a little bit more, this wouldn't have happened. Ladies and gentlemen, these things would not be happening today if we had not listened to the Cheneys of the world 15 years ago and 10 years ago and 5 years ago. These things are happening because we're getting into areas where we shouldn't be. Now we've got a problem, and it's a problem that's got to be solved. Russia is behind a lot of this stuff. We've been trying to tell people for years that the terrorist organizations are basically run out of Moscow. This was proven over and quite substantially in the 1970s. Nothing has changed. They are armed with Chinese and Russian weapons for the average troops. They get their uniforms that way and everything else. So the thing is that Russia is involved in all of this, not just the Ukraine and other areas. And so Russia now, by the way, is ramping up their propaganda into Europe. And here's a one-page article in the Wall Street Journal in that regard, and it shows the studio at RT. You'll remember a little over a year ago we tried to tell people that RT is a Russian asset. If it's a Russian asset, it's a Putin asset. And yet it's amazing to me to how many conservatives watch RT, because it has a little bit of truth to it. So does Fox. I quip it to people that I watch Fox because I scream less at the commentators than the other TV networks. It's not what they say, it's what they don't say. And there's a lot of conservatives that have been on RT on a regular basis. And so I have to ask the question, are these conservatives that stupid that they're going to help build the propaganda ministry of Putin? Or maybe are they on the other side? I don't know the answer to that. But I do know this. I'm going to keep it in the back of my head as to who has cooperated with them and be a little bit less reliant on their leadership in the future as a result of it. At any rate, they even had a poll that they printed in the Wall Street Journal about how Europeans now have feelings about the reputation of the reliance of their allies, the United States, or Russia. And this shows that actually the 35% of the European people rely on the United States, whereas only 15% rely on Russia. But I can tell you this from my own experience, talking with the youth in Europe. The youth in Europe, by and large, do not trust the United States more than they do not trust Russia. Now, here's their convoluted thinking. They believe because the United States has not had a war recently on their own soil, speaking in their words, that they're a little bit more apt to be engaged in war, not understanding the horrors of it. Whereas the Russians, who had this terrible war from the Nazis on their soil in many of their lifetimes, they will remember the horrors of war and be less likely to get involved in war. Well, this actually, it necessitates the thinking that the Russian people have anything to say about what their government does or does not do. The leaders care less about the horrors of war. It's the people that are out there that experience the horrors. Very rarely do the leadership ever engage in combat. They're never around combat. If they lose, sometimes they lose their lives, but generally speaking, the leaders don't experience the horrors of war like the average citizen does. So that kind of convoluted thinking is what is kind of imbued within the teaching in the European schools. Just like we see things that are happening in our own schools, where our own students are taught things that we know are skewed. They do that just as well in Europe. And one of them is to turn the students against the United States more toward Russia. In regard to the Russian bear being a threat, they formed NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, to stop Russia from coming into Europe. We're all familiar with that. In fact, we're even in Afghanistan under NATO, which people should ask, why would the North Atlantic Treaty Organization be involved way over in the Indian Ocean? At any rate, what really bothers me a lot now is that they're trying to get Georgia. That's not a southern state. This is a Russian state, or of course the Georgians would argue that, but it used to be an SSR within the USSR. And now they're trying to get Georgia into NATO. And if Putin has the same designs on Georgia that he has on the Ukraine and had on the Crimea and now has in his hands, it could drag us into a war with Russia, because an attack against one in NATO is an attack against all. And that is a very dangerous foreign entanglement. Also, what I've said recently in regard to NATO is that they are trying to make NATO the world police. They're trying to drag Japan, the Philippines, and others into NATO through the preliminary steps of opening up liaison offices there, working with their military, etc. But the plan is, by the Council on Foreign Relations and others, is to make NATO the whole police force of the world, in opposition to whatever it is that is the opponent of the day or the month or the year, the terrorist of the day or the month or the year, China, Russia, North Korea, whatever it happens to be. An attack against one is an attack against all and will be dragged into a war. So watch these developments as it concerns NATO. They're expanding their responsibility, and most of the troops that will be involved in NATO will be American troops, as it has always been. It will be American boys, American women over there in harm's way because of something somebody else did and dragged us into it. Until next week, we'll see you then.